For our next exercise, we're going to create a new notebook, um, so I'll cancel out of this one here. And you should also be presented with some menu like this. You're going to click this Python 3 tile under notebook, which opens up a new notebook. And we're going to name this or rename this Pandas 2. So we have our second Pandas file, and we're going to continue with these exercises. So for this question, we're given a table or a data frame. It has 3 columns, the ID, the name, and the email. And we're asked to remove the duplicate rows based on the email column. So we're supposed to focus in on the email column and find the duplicate values. We can see that john@example.com is mentioned twice. So what should we do in this case? It says keep only the first occurrence. It says remove these duplicate rows and keep only the first occurrence. So based on what the directions are telling us to do, we should keep Alice here, but then remove the customer with the ID of 5 because that's the second occurrence of John. So the expected output, doesn't have a customer ID 5. From 4, we go straight to 6. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The basic task is to remove duplicates from some data, right? So we have a new notebook right now. Before I actually start this task, I quickly just want to recap what we've done so far. So I'll create a recap markdown cell. So far we know how to create a data frame, and we know that this is basically a table for pandas, right? Simple table. I think it would probably be best if I do it like so. We know how to create a data frame. We know how to find the number of rows and columns of our table, right? This is basically the dimensions, finding the dimensions. Right? We also know how to display the first X rows of our table. For example, the first 3 rows, right? And we also know how to create. Let's start with the other one. We know how to filter our table by a specific condition. Remember, for this we used the dot locate function, right? Which helped us, filter out specific values based on some condition that we gave. And lastly, we also know how to create a new column and populate it with values. Remember, the key here was, for example, if our table was called students, we were able to focus in on a specific column, right, through the syntax. And then from there, we were able to, carry on with our task. So with this new task, right, Let me change this to a markdown as well. Our new task, by the way, you should also be coding along with me. And I would recommend you also write the markdown code because it helps you uh, switch back and forth between coding and then explaining your code. So when you pass on this file, say you were to pass on this file to someone else, they would easily be able to understand what you're trying to do. So our task right now is basically to remove duplicates from a table, or as Pandas calls it, a data frame. So let me first, so what's the first thing we have to do? Well, we need to somehow capture all of this data, right? So I'm going to create a new uh, variable called customer data, and I'll set it equal to, uh, basically we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 6 rows, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For each, the first row has 1, the second has a string with the names, the third is also a string, but with emails, right? .com. The second one is 2 with David. I'm going to copy the example at .com thing. And his email is Michael at example.com. Then we have 3 with Zachary. By the way, you should also be writing this so you start understanding how nested lists work. Uh, a lot of students, sometimes forget adding commas between the list items, but also between each of the lists. Sometimes you forget to add a comma here, and then things, start giving you problems. So make sure that you practice this. It's the only way you'll remember and get better. Zachary has an email at Sarah at example.com. Then we have 4, Alice and John at example.com. Then we have 5, Finn, and again, John at example.com. One other problem that, students or, people who are coding usually have is they forget to add or end quotations at some point. And then they think, they keep carrying on with writing the existing data. For example, here I, didn't end it. So if I continue writing, uh, it's going to start giving me an error. Do you see how this comma here? Sorry, let me just finish this. Alice at example.com. So if I run this, it should give me an error because it's saying, there's a problem at 5, string literal. It doesn't understand where this list is closing. If I click on this list, right, it thinks it closes over here, but it's supposed to end with this. So make sure that you're matching your, you know, the start of your quotes, the end of your quotes. Make sure you add commas, right? If I don't add a comma now, it's going to give me a big error. It's going to say the list must be integers. It thinks, this is, if we don't add a comma, it doesn't see this as part of uh, the list. It thinks it's part of the previous item that we just had. So it thinks that these two things are the same. So we should add a comma, right? So now we don't have any errors. Everything is fine. The next thing we really have to do, look at what are the names of the columns? So we have three columns. So I'm going to write a customer data calls, and this is going to be three columns. The first one is customer ID, the next one is name, and then email, right? And this shouldn't give me any errors, right? And now we really have to just put this all into a data frame. So let's do that. Let's call it a email or customers uh, variable, and then pandas dot uh, data frame. For the data, we pass in our customer data, and then for columns, we pass in the customer data columns, and then we end it all with end parentheses. Can anyone, do you know what the problem here will be? Well, this should give me an error because I haven't even imported pandas right now. And we're using a new notebook. This is not the same notebook as before. So in this notebook, pandas is not imported. So this should give me an error, and we'll see what sort of error it is. Right. It's saying pandas is not defined. So to make sure, this is also one of the common errors that people do. They forget to make their imports. So before we start using pandas, we have to import pandas, right? So I'm going to navigate up above to the cell above and press the plus sign. So now I have a cell right, above this, and I'm just going to import pandas here and then run this. And if I rerun this cell now, it shouldn't give me any problems. In fact, if I check the customers table, everything is nice and in order, right? It looks exactly like uh, the input that we want. So remember, our task is to remove the duplicates from the table. Specifically, we want to remove duplicate rows based on email, right? Based on email. Also, we want to keep the first occurrence. So we want to keep the first occurrence of the duplicate. We want to remove the second time it gets duplicated, right? So we will keep John here because we haven't seen it so far. But now this John we've seen before, so we're going to remove the whole row. So how do we do that very, very, efficiently with Python? There's a drop duplicates function. I'm going to switch to Markdown. So Python or Pandas has a very nice function called the dot drop duplicates. And inside we pass it the subset. In other words, what is the column you want to remove duplicates from. And then we're also going to add this thing called in place equals true, which basically means it's going to drop everything within this variable. It's not going to create a new variable or a new table, right? And this comes in very handy because if we have a very, very long or a table with a very large size, we want to preserve the memory, right? Uh, I'm not sure where we can see the memory here, but usually you're able to see how much memory your code is using, right? And then if we have in place true, it basically does everything on the original table. So, and this also keeps things neat and tidy. You don't have to worry about where your, updated table is. So where do we apply this function to? We apply it to our table. So customers dot drop underscore duplicates. The subset, as I said, is email. And then, we keep in place is equal to true. You see, I made a problem here. I didn't end the quotes. So now if I run this, something happened in the background. It did everything in place. So for me to really check if things worked is uh, run the table again and see if things were removed. Sometimes, you won't see, you can't really see everything, right? Because if we have a table with a million rows, you can't go line by line and see if things were removed. So a neat trick to do is, once we've created our original table, uh, you can capture its rows and columns. So I'll just run customer.shape here. And we know it has 6 rows and 3 columns. And then when I drop duplicates, right, I can run the same function again. And if it's different from the time we ran it before, that means we indeed removed some duplicates. In this case, the updated table has 5 rows. The old one had 6, so we removed 1 duplicate. And this is like an easy way to check how many duplicates were removed. So before I end the video, I just want to recap this drop duplicates function, right? So it takes in the subset, right? Which is column you want to drop duplicates for, and in place equals true. We'll make sure that the filtering happens on your original table. So that's really, what you have to take away from drop duplicates. It really expects one argument. This in place equals true is optional. I guess I can write optional here. The other thing that you'll notice is by default, it removed, it kept the first occurrence. If we don't want it to keep the first occurrence, we can, uh, pass in additional arguments here. Let me quickly pull up Pandas, the documentation for drop duplicates, and then we'll see if we can actually, have it keep the second occurrence and remove the first one. So you can see here, I'm looking at the Pandas documentation. Here's the function, right? It takes in a subset. We can pass in this argument called keep as well. So I can pass this in. By default, it's first. Some other things I can pass in is last. So if I pass in last, instead of Alice, it's going to keep Finn, right? So let's just run all of this again and see what happens. So you see here, now we kept Finn instead of Alice. So the documentation is also a very good source, the Pandas documentation. You can look at most of the functions that Pandas has created. I mean, you can look at all of the functions that Pandas has created, and then you can see if it supports some additional functionality for you to use.